Good morning, class. Don't be shy. Say it back. I'll wait. All right. Grab you something to drink. Grab you a pen, paper, something to take notes on because today's class is in session. Topic of choice, boundaries. I love talking about boundaries. There's a couple things, two main points we're going to talk about today is one, what boundaries actually are, two, how to make boundaries and implement those boundaries. So, first part, let's talk about what a boundary actually is. I think there is this misunderstanding of what boundaries are. A lot of people will make a boundary for the other person or thing, right? We'll make a boundary for something that has nothing to do with us really. It's a boundary for them. And if they do something, then we're upset, we're mad, and we can't believe that they did that because that's the boundary that we put. Now, a boundary is not an enclosed place that you put on somebody else. You have to remember that you cannot control another individual. The only thing you have the power to control is yourself, your reactions, your emotions. So when we're making boundaries and we think of boundaries as that, something that I control, because you can't control another person. A boundary is something you control, right? So it's an action, it's an emotion, it's a response that you have complete control over. So a lot of people will draw a line in the sand and say that you cannot cross. And then they'll put up their wall across the line. And then that creates this hardness that removes that feminine softness from you because now you're always on edge trying to enforce this other individual to not cross that line. You're so worried about it, that them crossing the line, that you have now removed what the boundary is actually for. You are protecting the boundary, but the boundary is actually protection for you. So remove that idea out of your brain. It is not something that you stand there and create a stronghold for. You have to create a boundary and let it be, let it rest, okay? But what boundaries are for, they're a line that, they're definitely a line that you draw in the sand, but you don't stand there. You go and do whatever it is that you're doing. So when someone meets that line, you can say, hey, this is a line. This is the line right here. That's it. You don't have to say, if you cross it, then this will happen. No, you don't even have to do that. You just have to say, this is the line that I draw, and see what they choose. Now, if that person chooses to cross that line, then you implement the consequences and repercussions that you have in place for crossing that line. For example, I use this example a lot because this is my favorite example and a personal example of mine. If someone is to interrupt you constantly, and I've had a family member that constantly interrupted me while I was talking, would never let me finish my sentence. It was absolutely infuriating. It is my biggest pet peeve, honestly. If I have something to say, let me say it. I don't care if you think that you're going to know what I have to say. I want to get it out. I have that right. I have that. So I have created a boundary for myself that said, if this person doesn't let me finish my sentence, fine. I will not finish my sentence. I will not say another word. That's it. That was it. And I didn't tell that person that. I didn't. So what I did was I created this boundary because I got tired of it. I was just so frustrated. I created this boundary that said that if he interrupts me one more time, I will not say a word. I'm not going to finish what I was saying, and that's it. And like I said, no announcement. I just did the thing. So again, because I knew it was going to happen, right? So the action happened. I was interrupted. The boundary kicked in. The boundary was that I will stop talking. I stopped talking. I didn't say another word. And they weren't used to that. They wanted a response from me now. And so they tried to apologize. What were you going to say? No, it's fine. It's all right. Nothing at all. It was my boundary that I was not going to say another word. And it was silent after that. And, time passes. All right, let's try it again. Let's have another conversation. It could be same day, it could be days later, it could be weeks later, it could be months later, whatever it is, the same boundary still stays in place. Okay, the boundary that you've created still stays in place no matter how much time has passed. If you choose to give a person another opportunity, that is your choice. But you keep the boundary in place. You don't ever say, oh, well, they did not learn from my boundary, because they will learn, and I will show you how. Okay, so again, the same thing happens. So I'm having this conversation with said person, and the person interrupts me again. I stop talking. Move on with my life. That was it. No more words, no more discussion. And again, after a while, they realize, oh, I actually do want to know what you're going to say. What were you going to say? And they apologized. And again, I said, no, it's okay. Because this is the boundary that I implemented. You have a boundary, you stick to it. That is the key thing. If you want people to learn from your boundaries that you have implemented, you stick to them. Don't sway your boundary. Boundaries are not to be swayed. They're a line that you have tattooed in the sand, okay? You have drawn that line in the sand, and it is not coming up unless you choose for it to come up. And you can choose willingly, like just because, I don't know, they're trying, I feel bad. No, you feel bad for yourself, okay? Because what they're doing is rude. You've implemented that boundary in the first place for a reason. Don't be so easy to give up on your boundaries. They will learn. Prime example, with this boundary that I implemented in place, after a few times of doing this person has now realized that I will stop talking if they continue to interrupt me. They have learned, they have trained themselves that if I want to hear what she has to say, that I cannot interrupt her. Otherwise, she will not continue. And that's what they learned. So now, do they interrupt me? No, they don't. They let me talk. Because they know that if they interrupt me, I'm done. That's it. I'm not saying another word. I'm done with it. And it's a trained response. So boundaries are implements that you put into place that train other people on how to respond to you, how to interact with you, what you will not settle for, what you will take. That's what boundaries are for. They're to protect you. So don't get rid of your protection. Allow it to stand strong by enforcing that boundary to the fullest extent, okay? So one, that is what a boundary is. Now, part number 2 is how to build the boundary and how to implement it, right? I feel like a lot of us, like I said, we have a boundary that's not very strong. And one reason why we have a boundary that's not very strong is because we don't have a basis for that boundary. We don't have full faith in that boundary. We don't have values for that boundary to be strong. We just say something and out of the moment because we're mad, like we don't want you to do that because we're angry. We don't sit down and think about what the boundary actually means for us. So the first thing you need to do before you implement a boundary is, what are your values? What are your principles? For me, before I implemented that boundary of me not talking if I'm interrupted, my boundary wasn't there, or my principle for myself wasn't there. The value of I have words that I want to say and they mean something, that wasn't there. It was oh, I guess I don't have words I need to say, it's fine. And so I bickered back and forth. But now I had this value that my words are valuable and I demand to be heard. And if you refuse to hear me, then you don't get to. It is a privilege. I turned it into something that is beautiful. It is a privilege to hear me. And that was my value. That was my principle. And it was easier to create a boundary off of that because I knew what my value and my principle was. So you have to come up with a list of what your values and principles are, because that's where your boundaries are going to stem from. And that's how they stay strong. For example, if you're a person who is shy and you get stepped on a lot because you're quiet, maybe not necessarily shy, you're just quiet, you're quiet, and you don't really appreciate people stepping over you just because you're quiet. Maybe that's a boundary, that's a value. I might be quiet, but I am not powerless. I may be quiet, but I am not a doormat. That can be your value that you have for yourself. I am quiet, but I do not get treated like as such. And the boundary is in place. So whenever someone mistakes your quietness for weakness, you decide to step up in that moment. That's when you step up, not any other time, because you don't need to prove anything. Only when you feel like you're being trampled on. You have to find what your values and principles are. That's where your boundaries start. Once you've done that, then you can implement them. Let's take this same example. Okay, you're quiet, but not powerless. You're quiet, but not a doormat. So at work, let's say, for example, you're quiet. And so people think that you're willing to change. You're willing to inconvenience yourself for the sake of them. Because unfortunately, quiet people do get deemed as being softer and weaker. But this is the moment you get to showcase that I might be quiet, but I am not powerless, okay? So, and I again speak from experience because I am quiet at work. I do not partake in a lot of conversations because they just don't fill me in any kind of way. So I'm quiet, and a lot of times people will ask me to change my things around for them. And it took me a while to understand this, but once I did, I learned I'm quiet, not powerless. So implementing this boundary, if it inconveniences me, then it's a no. I don't mind being accommodating, but there comes a point where you're a little too accommodating and you have to say no, because there's no reason why you should be constantly inconveniencing yourself. So draw that boundary. If it inconveniences me, then it's a no. If it doesn't inconvenience me, sure, fine, no problem at all. But I will not inconvenience myself for the sake of others. That is your boundary, because your value is I am quiet, not powerless. So you have power in the way that people look at you, because people are going to look at you in any kind of way, but you have to have some type of value in place so that way they can see who you really are. And you don't have to prove this every day. It just comes into the times where your boundary needs to kick in. Your boundary is a protection. So it's protecting you. In this instance, it's protecting you from being inconvenienced, because you don't deserve to be inconvenienced every single time somebody else has an issue. That is their issue, not yours. This goes back to your boundary, because it goes back to your principles and values that you have put in place. Do you see how it all works so beautifully, right? It's amazing. So once you understand that boundaries are protection for you and they come from your values and principles, it is a beautiful place to put. It's a beautiful place to be, because you can put your boundaries into action in your actual life. So tell me, what is a boundary that you are going to put into place today? And then tell me, what is that repercussion? What is that consequence if someone chooses to violate that boundary? and let me know, did this video help make it any clearer for you about what boundaries are? Do you feel more empowered with your choices today for boundaries? Let me know. Tell me in the comments. Otherwise, class is out of session. We'll see you in the next one.